Traveling had always been an adventure, filled with excitement, uncertainties, and unseen forces at play. Whether it was a short trip to the next village or a long journey across the country, every traveler carried a silent hope to leave safely and arrive without harm. Obinna was no different. As he packed his bag, he felt nothing but eagerness. After months of staying in school, the thought of going home brought relief. The comfort of his mother's cooking, the warmth of familiar faces, and the joy of reconnecting with his roots made the journey worth it. Guy, you no go pray before you go? His roommate, Emeka, asked, watching him zip his bag. Obinna chuckled. Pray for what? The road is clear, and I'm in a hurry. I beg, my mama don't pray enough for me. Emeka shook his head. No be everybody way start journey they reach house. Obinna wept of his friend's concern. He had traveled so many times before, why would this time be different? He had heard countless stories of travelers facing unexpected dangers, but those were just stories, right? Outside, the park was bustling with activity. Passengers hurried to board their buses, conductors shouted destinations, and vendors weaved through the crowd selling snacks and water. It was a scene familiar to anyone who had ever traveled, and Obinna was about to learn that lesson in the most unexpected way. The morning air was crisp as Obinna's phone buzzed for the third time. He sighed, already knowing who it was. He hesitated before answering. Obinna, have you prayed? His mother's voice was gentle but firm. Mama, good morning, he replied, forcing a smile as if she could see him. I'm about to leave. No wahala. She wasn't convinced. My son, before every journey, you must pray. Not all roads are safe, and not all eyes watching you are friendly. Obinna sighed. Mama, I travel all the time. I'll be fine. But this time feels different, she insisted. I had a dream last night. It was not clear, but I saw danger on your path. Please, my son, pray before you go. Obinna rubbed his forehead. His mother was a woman of strong faith, always believing in the power of prayer and dreams. But he had heard these warnings before. He had never encountered any real danger. Mama, I don't have time for this now, he said impatiently. The bus is almost full. I need to go. His mother sighed on the other end. At least let me pray for you. He exhaled. Fine, Mama. Just be quick. She began praying, her voice filled with urgency. She asked God to cover him, to shield him from unseen forces, to ensure his safe arrival. As she spoke, a strange chill ran down Obinna's spine, but he shook it off. Amen, he muttered quickly as she finished. I have to go now, Mama. I'll call when I reach. God go with you, my son, she said softly. As he ended the call, he felt a momentary unease, but he dismissed it. To him, it was just another journey. Little did he know, his mother's prayers were already fighting battles on his behalf. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the dusty roads of the university. Obinna felt an odd sense of unease as he walked towards the bus park, his suitcase rolling behind him. The day felt ordinary, yet something about it didn't sit right. It was as though the universe was sending subtle warnings, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. As he passed by a group of students, a black cat suddenly darted across his path. Obinna paused, his heart skipping a beat. Isn't that bad luck, he thought, but he quickly shook it off, dismissing it as superstition. He had never been one to believe in omens. Further down the road, a sudden gust of wind swept through the street, blowing a pile of old papers into his face. He swatted them away with a chuckle, but there was a feeling in the air, an energy he couldn't explain. It was as though something was trying to draw his attention, but he wasn't ready to listen. He reached the bus station, where a long line of travelers waited. A man sitting on the bench ahead caught his eye. The stranger was muttering to himself, his face pale as if he had seen something no one else could. Obinna looked at him curiously, but before he could ask if everything was okay, the man stood up suddenly and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Then, just as Obinna boarded the bus, an elderly woman approached him, holding a wooden staff. She stared at him with deep, piercing eyes, her gaze unevenly direct. You travel today? She asked in a voice that seemed to echo in the air around them. Yes, ma'am, Obinna replied, slightly uncomfortable. You be careful. The road you take, it's not safe, she warned, her voice low, as though speaking from a place of experience. Obinna laughed nervously, brushing off her words. Thank you, ma'am, but I'm fine. I've traveled this route plenty of times. The woman smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in her eyes. Not all travelers reach their destination, young man. Some paths are darker than the same. With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Obinna standing there, uneasy but unconvinced. The bus was already starting to pull away, and Obinna hurried to board. He was anxious to get started, but deep inside, something was stirring. Despite his dismissal of the strange occurrences, he couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, something was trying to warn him. But he was already too far into the journey to turn back. The bus rattled to life, its engine growling as it slowly pulled away from the station. Obinna settled into his seat, pushing aside the lingering unease from the morning. He focused on the familiar sights of the bustling city slowly fading in the distance, eager to put the doubts behind him. It was just another trip, after all. As the bus drove further into the countryside, the scenery began to change. The paved roads gave way to rough, unkept highways that twisted through vast stretches of dry land. The sky was overcast, dark clouds gathering on the horizon as if the heavens themselves were watching over the travelers. Still, Obinna pushed aside any lingering thoughts, telling himself it was just an ordinary day. Inside the bus, passengers settled in, some dozing off, others chatting quietly. A few people were clearly nervous about the journey, but most seemed to take it in stride, used to the rough rides. The bus lurched forward, navigating potholes and sharp turns with an unpredictable rhythm, But Obinna, used to the discomfort of travel, paid no mind. As the bus picked up speed, a strange tension filled the air. Obinna looked around, noting the unusual quietness that had settled among the passengers. The driver, a man with a stern face, gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes scanning the road ahead as if something was off. The usual chatter and laughter that came with long trips were absent, replaced by an uneasy silence. Even the sounds of the wheels on the gravel seemed different, heavier, more ominous. The rain began to fall lightly at first, a fine mist settling on the windows, but soon it picked up. Within minutes, the drizzle turned into a torrential downpour, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up. The once dry roads became slick, and Obinna could feel the bus slipping as it maneuvered through the waterlogged paths. "Shouldn't we slow down?" someone from the back called out, their voice shaky. The driver didn't respond, his focus entirely on the road. The storm had intensified so quickly that it felt almost unnatural, like a force beyond the weather itself was at play. The bus continued to lurch, its tires screeching against the wet asphalt, and Obinna gripped the seat in front of him, his heart pounding in his chest. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. For a brief moment, the world outside the bus turned white, and Obinna's vision was obscured. The passengers tensed, some clutching the handrails, others murmuring prayers under their breaths. Obinna closed his eyes briefly, trying to steady his nerves. The rain intensified even more, now coming down in torrents that flooded the road, making it nearly impossible for the driver to see. The vehicle swerved dangerously, and Obinna's stomach dropped as the bus veered toward the edge of the road. For a split second, it felt as though time had slowed. His heart raced, and every instinct screamed at him to do something, anything, to ensure his safety. But there was nothing he could do. The bus skidded, its tires losing grip on the slick road, heading straight for a deep ravine just off the road's edge. A collective gasp rose from the passengers, and panic spread through the vehicle. Some people began to shout, others prayed aloud. It was in this moment of utter chaos, when it seemed as if nothing could save them, that the bus miraculously regained its balance. The tires found traction, and with a sudden lurch, the bus righted itself, steering back onto the road. Obinna's breath caught in his throat, his hands gripping the armrest so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His heart still raced, and the adrenaline surged through his veins as the reality of what had just happened settled over him. The bus had almost plummeted into the ravine, yet they were alive. Barely. He looked around, noticing the same shocked expressions on the faces of his fellow passengers. Some were whispering prayers under their breath, others stared at the driver in disbelief. The danger had passed, but it had left an imprint on everyone's soul. Obinna felt a deep sense of unease settle in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't just an ordinary journey, he realized. Something, or someone, had been watching over them. But who, or what, had intervened? And would the journey remain safe? The rain had finally subsided, but the heavy silence that followed lingered in the air, thick with unspoken fear. Obinna sat stiffly in his seat, his fingers still gripping the armrest, his body tense from the near miss. The bus was quieter than before, with only the occasional rustle of a passenger shifting in their seat breaking the stillness. Yet, it wasn't just the silence that unnerved him, it was the feeling that something was watching, something unseen. The driver's hands remained firm on the steering wheel, his eyes glued to the road ahead, his face grim. It seemed as though he was determined to push through the storm, no matter the cost. But even as Obinna observed him, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was off. Something about this journey didn't feel right. At the next rest stop, the bus pulled over to allow passengers a brief break. Obinna, though feeling the weight of exhaustion, didn't move. Instead, he stayed seated, his thoughts racing. Was it just a coincidence that the bus had nearly crashed? Or was there something more to it? The way the storm had intensified so suddenly, it felt unnatural. A voice from behind broke his thoughts. The driver's too confident. A man muttered to his companion. "We shouldn't be traveling in these conditions. I heard about an accident just last week on the same route." Obinna glanced behind him, locking eyes with the man who had spoken. The man's face was tense, his brow furrowed with worry. Obinna wanted to ask more, but before he could, the man turned his gaze away and walked out of the bus, disappearing into the crowd. As Obinna sat there, lost in thought, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find an older woman, her eyes deep and weary. She looked familiar. He realized she had been sitting near him on the bus the whole time, but he hadn't noticed her until now. "You should get off this bus," she said in a hushed voice, her words carrying an eerie urgency. Obinna's heart skipped a beat. What? Why? The woman's eyes were wide, filled with both fear and something else, something he couldn't quite place. "There's danger ahead. If you don't get off now, it will be too late." Obinna was taken aback. "What are you talking about? We're almost halfway there." "You don't understand," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I see things. You don't want to be on this bus any longer." Before he could respond, she stood abruptly and walked toward the bus exit. But just as quickly as she had approached, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd outside. Obinna stared after her, confusion and skepticism clouding his thoughts. Was she just another anxious passenger, or did she know something he didn't? He stood up, stepping outside to stretch his legs and clear his mind. The air felt cooler now, the night approaching. As he walked around the parking lot, the same strange sensation of being watched crept over him again. He glanced around, but the area seemed empty. The few people who had gotten off the bus were now scattered, talking in hushed tones or walking into nearby shops. It was then that Obinna noticed something. Off to the side, there was a figure standing alone near a tree. The figure was tall, cloaked in a long, dark robe, his face hidden beneath a hood. Obinna felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The figure was staring directly at him. For a moment, Obinna froze, locked in an unblinking gaze with the mysterious figure. But as soon as he tried to approach, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing without a trace. Obinna's heart raced. Who was that? What did they want? He quickly returned to the bus, his mind swelling with unanswered questions. But as he climbed back onto the bus and sat down, the unease didn't leave him. The whispers of the unseen, warnings, omens, and strange occurrences seemed to be everywhere now. And yet, despite his growing apprehension, he couldn't help but wonder, was it all just coincidence? Or was he being led to ignore something far more dangerous than he realized? As the bus began to move again, Obinna couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn deeper into something he couldn't understand. And no matter how much he tried to dismiss the strange events, they seemed to be closing in on him, pulling him toward an uncertain fate. The bus rumbled along the road, its tires slapping against the wet asphalt, the eerie silence from earlier giving way to a renewed sense of dread. The air had grown heavy once again, thick with the kind of tension that made it hard to breathe. Obinna sat by the window, staring out into the fading light as the road twisted and turned, leading them deeper into unfamiliar territory. As they crossed a narrow bridge over a swollen river, the first raindrops began to fall. It started as a light drizzle, the kind of rain that seemed to promise nothing more than a passing shower. But within moments, the gentle patter against the window turned into something far more intense. The sky darkened rapidly, as though the heavens themselves had decided to unleash their fury. Obinna glanced out the window, watching as the road ahead disappeared into a mist of rain. The driver, now squinting into the downpour, adjusted his speed slightly, but the road was becoming slippery. The bus groaned as it fought to maintain its balance, the tires skimming across the waterlogged paths. Not again, Obinna muttered under his breath, his stomach tightening. It was as if the storm had come out of nowhere, the clouds gathering with unnatural speed. The once quiet passengers now shifted nervously, casting furtive glances at one another. The man from earlier who had spoken of last week's accident sat upright, his face pale. He clutched his back tightly, his knuckles white as he looked out the window with a faraway expression. A crack of thunder rang out, shaking the bus, and a flash of lightning lit up the sky. The whole world seemed to pause for a moment, the flash illuminating the darkened road and the trees that lined it. In that brief instant, Obinna caught sight of something moving in the shadows, something that shouldn't have been there. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. But there was nothing. The bus lurched violently as the rain began to pound harder, the sound now deafening against the roof. The driver's hands tightened around the wheel, and Obinna could see the strain on his face as he tried to navigate through the storm. Yet, no matter how hard he pressed the accelerator, the bus seemed to be fighting against something more than just bad weather. The road ahead twisted into an even darker path, obscured by the sheets of rain. Then, without warning, a loud thud echoed from under the bus. The tires skidded briefly, and the vehicle shook. Several passengers gasped in alarm, and the man sitting behind Obinna muttered under his breath. What was that? What happened? The driver cursed under his breath and slammed the brakes, forcing the bus to slow down. The engine sputtered for a moment before the driver regained control, but the bus was no longer on steady ground. It seemed as though the road had vanished beneath them, swallowed by the storm, and in its place was something far more menacing, a darkness that threatened to consume them. Obinna felt the tension rise, his chest tightening with every passing second. The strange unease that had been gnawing at him throughout the journey now felt like a presence in the very air around him, suffocating and undeniable. Suddenly, the bus jerked again, this time much harder. The front tires hit something, and the whole vehicle tilted to one side, sending a ripple of panic through the passengers. Obinna gripped his seat, trying to stay steady as the bus tilted dangerously. The driver cursed again, trying to right the wheel, but the wheels were no longer gripping the road. The storm outside intensified, and within moments, the rain was coming down in torrents, the road now an unrecognizable mess of water and mud. The bus lurched again, this time so violently that Obinna felt the very floor beneath him shake. He heard the tires screeching as they fought for traction, but it was clear that the bus was losing the battle. Hold on, the driver yelled, his voice strained. Everyone, brace yourselves. The terror was palpable now. The bus was no longer moving at a normal pace. It was as if the forces of nature themselves had conspired to trap them. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and the rain came down so hard that it blurred everything beyond the windows. Lightning struck again, illuminating the world outside in stark, terrifying flashes. Obinna could feel his heartbeat in his throat as the bus fought for control. Was this it? Was this how his journey would end? The road ahead seemed to stretch into an abyss, the shadows cast by the storm making everything feel like a nightmare, a place where nothing, nor anyone, could survive. And in the midst of it all, he could swear he heard something, a whisper, soft and barely audible, yet unmistakable. Get off, while you can. The voice was faint, carried away almost immediately by the roar of the storm. But it was enough to make his skin crawl. He looked around, but no one else seemed to have heard it. The ominous presence was growing stronger, and the feeling that something unseen was watching them was more pronounced than ever. The storm was no longer just a physical force, it had become something much darker, more sinister. Obinna's thoughts raced. He was no longer sure if the danger ahead was from the storm or something far worse that lay waiting on the road. The storm raged with a fury that felt like it had no end. The wind howled against the windows, and the rain continued to hammer the bus like an angry torrent. Inside, the passengers sat in tense silence, each of them gripped by an unshakable sense of dread. The atmosphere was thick with fear, as if the very air inside the bus had become suffocating. The driver's face was grim, his hands firmly gripping the steering wheel, but it was clear that he, too, was struggling to keep control of the vehicle. Obinna stared out the window, watching as the world outside blurred in the downpour. The road had become almost unrecognizable, swallowed by the water and mud. The bus seemed to sway with every gust of wind, teetering on the edge of the road. Obinna's heart hammered in his chest as he fought the overwhelming urge to panic. There was a strange sensation in the pit of his stomach, a sense that something terrible was about to happen. He had heard the whispers, felt the weight of the unseen, and now, it seemed as though the worst was about to unfold. Suddenly, the bus gave an alarming jerk, followed by a loud scraping noise from beneath. A collective gasp rose from the passengers as the vehicle shuddered violently. The tires skidded, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the bus was airborne, hanging precariously between the earth and the abyss below. "What's happening?" Someone screamed from the back of the bus, their voice trembling. The driver cursed, his voice strained with panic. "We've lost traction. Hold on." His words were barely audible over the cacophony of the storm. Obinna's eyes widened as the bus began to tilt to one side. The sound of screeching metal filled the air as the tires struggled to grip the slick, waterlogged road. The bus veered dangerously close to the edge of the road, the wheels spinning wildly, sending spray in all directions. It was a moment suspended in time, a feeling of weightlessness and impending doom. The next thing Obinna knew, the bus lurched violently, and with a sickening, grinding noise, it slid off the road. The world tilted as the bus began to slide sideways, its momentum carrying it toward the steep embankment just off the road. Passengers screamed in panic, and some were thrown from their seats as the bus spun uncontrollably. Obinna's stomach churned as the bus continued to slide, the sound of its tires screeching in protest echoing in his ears. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. He gripped the seat in front of him, his knuckles turning white, his mind racing. Was this it? Was this how it would all end? In a split second, the bus careened off the road and crashed into a thick cluster of trees that lined the side. The impact sent a violent shockwave through the vehicle, throwing everyone forward as the bus came to an abrupt halt. The air was thick with dust and the smell of burning rubber. The screeching of metal against the trees was deafening. Everything went silent. For a long, terrifying moment, there was only the sound of the storm outside, the rain pounding relentlessly on the roof, the wind howling, and the occasional creaking of the bus as it settled into its new, precarious position. Then, the reality of what had just happened began to set in. The bus had crashed. Obinna sat frozen, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His heart was racing in his chest, and his body was trembling with adrenaline. He could hear the frantic voices of the other passengers, some crying, others shouting for help. People were starting to move, scrambling to find safety, but Obinna couldn't bring himself to move. His mind was still reeling, trying to comprehend the disaster that had just unfolded in front of him. "Everyone, stay calm." The driver's voice broke through the chaos. "We need to check for injuries. Don't panic." But Obinna couldn't help but panic. His eyes scanned the scene, and he realized that the situation was much worse than he had imagined. The bus was tilted dangerously on its side, and the damage to the vehicle was severe. The windshield was shattered, and the metal frame had been bent and twisted. He could smell the faint scent of gasoline in the air, and the thought of a fire creeping into the wreckage made his skin crawl. "Obinna, are you okay?" A voice called from across the bus. It was the man who had warned him about the dangers earlier. Obinna's mind snapped back into focus as he turned toward the voice. I'm fine," he managed to say, though his voice shook with fear. The man, looking just as shaken, reached out a hand to help Obinna out of his seat. He was about to respond when suddenly, there was a loud cracking sound from above. The trees surrounding the bus creaked ominously, as though the storm was not finished with them yet. Everyone froze, looking up with wide eyes. But before anyone could react, the wind howled even louder, and the trees around them began to bend dangerously, threatening to fall. Obinna's heart raced once more. The worst was far from over, far from the chaos of the storm and the wreckage of the bus. In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills, Mama Nkechi sat on her wooden stool, a deep frown creasing her forehead. She had been uneasy all day, her spirit restless, as though something was wrong. She had woken up before dawn with a sharp pain in her chest and a strong urge to pray. At first, she had ignored it, attributing it to a bad dream. But as the morning stretched into the afternoon, the feeling only intensified. Something was not right. Obinna had called her before leaving, assuring her he would arrive safely. Yet, her heart felt heavy, like a stone pressing against her chest. The more she tried to shake it off, the stronger the burden became. Finally, unable to ignore the weight in her spirit any longer, she rose and knelt on the mat in the corner of her small room. With trembling hands, she lit a small candle and clasped her hands together. "Chineke nna," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what is happening, but I place my son in your hands. Cover him, Lord. Protect him from the dangers of the road." Her prayer started as a whisper but quickly grew in intensity. Words poured from her lips, some she understood, others came from deep within her spirit. She called upon the heavens, invoking divine protection over her son. "Any evil waiting for him on that road, Father, scatter it." She cried. "Any harm planned against him, let it be destroyed." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead to the mat. Unknown to her, at that very moment, miles away, Obinna's bus was skidding off the road, heading toward disaster. But as she prayed, a shift occurred in the unseen realm. In the wreckage of the bus, as passengers screamed and chaos reigned, something miraculous happened. Just as the vehicle was about to flip completely, it hit a large tree that held it in place, preventing it from plunging further into the deep ravine below. The crash was still severe, but it could have been far worse. Lives could have been lost, and yet, somehow, against all odds, they had survived. As Obinna sat amidst the wreckage, his heart throbbing, he felt something strange, a warmth, an unseen presence surrounding him. His heart pounded as he recalled his mother's words before he left. My son, always pray before you travel. You don't know what lies ahead. At that moment, he knew he was alive because someone, somewhere, had prayed. And that someone was his mother. As Obinna sat in the wrecked bus, his pulse still racing from the crash, a strange silence settled over the scene. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the cries of frightened passengers had faded into hushed murmurs. Something felt different, almost as if time itself had paused. Then, suddenly, the wind picked up again. But this time, it wasn't like the howling storm that had nearly driven them off the road. This wind was different, gentle yet powerful, sweeping through the wreckage with an eerie calmness. It carried a strange presence, as though unseen eyes were watching over them. Obinna shivered, his skin prickling with an unexplainable sensation. He wasn't the only one who noticed. The old woman seated beside him clutched her chest and whispered, Chineke. The spirits are here. The wind swirled through the broken windows of the bus, rustling clothes and lifting debris, yet it felt purposeful, almost deliberate. As it moved, something incredible happened. Passengers who had been trapped found themselves freed. A young boy, whose leg had been pinned under a seat, suddenly slid out as if an invisible hand had pulled him to safety. The driver, who had been struggling to open the damaged door, gasped as it suddenly swung open on its own, letting in the cool, fresh air. What is happening? He muttered, his hands trembling. Obinna could hardly believe his eyes. The presence of something greater, something beyond human understanding, filled the air. It was as if unseen forces had stepped in to protect them, guiding them away from complete disaster. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the wind stilled. The eerie silence returned, leaving only the faint sound of the rain tapping against the leaves. It was as though whatever force had intervened had completed its task and disappeared. The old woman turned to Obinna, her wrinkled hands trembling. Someone prayed for you, she said with certainty. That wind, it was not ordinary. Obinna swallowed hard, his mind flashing back to his mother. The way she had begged him to pray, the burden she must have felt. A deep realization sank into his soul. He had ignored the warnings, but someone, had still fought for him. And in that moment, he knew, this was not just luck. It was divine intervention. The eerie silence that followed the mysterious wind was almost as unsettling as the crash itself. Obinna could still feel the presence of something divine lingering in the air, but the weight of what had just happened left him shaking to his core. The driver, who had been frozen in disbelief, finally snapped back to reality. With trembling hands, he turned the ignition. The engine sputtered before roaring back to life. A murmur of relief spread through the bus, but no one cheered. There was an unspoken understanding that the had narrowly escaped death. Slowly, the driver pressed the accelerator, testing the vehicle's stability. Miraculously, despite the damage, the bus still moved. The passengers, battered and bruised but alive, exchanged nervous glances. A young mother held her child tightly to her chest, tears streaming down her face. I thought we were gone, she whispered. But something saved us. The old woman who had sensed the supernatural wind nodded. Not something, someone. Prayer kept us alive. Obinna swallowed hard. He had never been particularly religious, brushing off his mother's warnings as mere superstition. But after what had just happened, he could no longer deny that unseen forces had been at work. As the bus slowly rolled forward, passengers began to talk, some sharing their close encounters with danger, others vowing to never take another journey without praying first. A man in the front seat shook his head. I should have listened to my wife. She told me to pray before leaving. A teenage girl clutched her pendant and whispered, I'll never travel without praying again. Obinna remained silent, staring out the window. He had been saved, but he wasn't the same. Something within him had shifted. He had come face to face with the reality of life's fragility and the power of unseen protection. As the bus continued down the road, now moving with cautious determination, one thing was certain, no one on board would ever forget this journey. As the bus pulled into the station, Obinna felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over him. The once exciting journey home had turned into a nightmare, but somehow, he had survived. He stepped off the bus, his legs still shaky from the ordeal. Around him, passengers murmured quiet prayers of gratitude, some even kneeling to give thanks right there at the station. Obinna clutched his bag tightly and started the familiar walk home. But this time, everything felt different. The streets, the houses, the very air around him, it all carried a weight he had never noticed before. The near-death experience had shifted something deep within him. As he approached his family's compound, his heart pounded. He had brushed off his mother's warnings before leaving, ignoring her plea to pray. Now, he couldn't wait to see her. Before he could knock, the door swung open. There she was, Mama Nkechi, her face streaked with dried tears, her eyes filled with relief. Without a word, she pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him as if she would never let go. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. My spirit was restless the whole day. I prayed, my son. I prayed like never before. Obinna swallowed the lump in his throat. He had always loved his mother, but he had never truly understood the depth of her wisdom and faith until now. Pulling back slightly, he looked into her eyes. Mama, I should have listened. I should have prayed. She cupped his face gently. You are here, my son. That is what matters. But never forget, prayer is not just a ritual, it is a shield. Obinna nodded, his mind replaying the strange events of the journey, the omens, the storm, the supernatural wind. If there was one thing he had learned, it was that unseen battles were always being fought, and prayer was more powerful than he had ever believed. That night, as he lay on his childhood bed, he whispered a quiet prayer for the first time in a long while, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. And for the first time since the journey, he felt at peace. Obinna lay awake in his childhood room, staring at the ceiling. The day's events replayed in his mind, the near-fatal journey, the mysterious wind, his mother's unwavering faith. He had always believed in logic, in things he could see and explain. But today, he had come face to face with something far greater than human understanding. He turned to the small wooden table beside his bed, where an old Bible sat untouched. His mother had placed it there long ago, urging him to read it whenever he traveled. He had always ignored it, but now, his fingers stressed the cover as if it held the answers he had been too blind to seek. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His mother entered, a gentle smile on her face. She sat beside him, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. "You've been thinking," she said softly. Obinna nodded. "Mama, I don't know how to explain it, but I felt something on that bus. Like an unseen force was fighting for us." Mama Nkechi sighed, placing a hand on his. "My son, the world is not just what we see. There are battles we don't understand, forces beyond our eyes. That is why we pray, not just to ask for things, but to cover ourselves from dangers we don't even know exist." Her words settled deep in Obinna's heart. He had always dismissed her prayers as mere tradition, but today, they had saved his life. "I should have prayed before I left," he admitted, his voice laced with regret. His mother smiled. "It is never too late to learn, my son. What matters is that you now understand." Obinna exhaled, feeling the weight of realization sink in. He had survived not because of luck, but because of something far greater. And from this moment on, he would never take prayer, or the unseen battles of life, lightly again. That night, as he knelt beside his bed for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer of his own. Not because he was afraid, but because he finally believed. And in that moment, he knew, his journey was no longer just about reaching a destination. It was about working with understanding, faith, and the awareness that unseen battles were always being fought on his behalf. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a golden glow across Obinna's room. He stretched, feeling a strange sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The fear and confusion from the journey had settled, replaced by a newfound awareness of the unseen forces at play in his life. As he stepped into the living room, he found his mother seated with her Bible open, humming a soft hymn. He watched her for a moment, the woman who had prayed him out of disaster, the woman whose faith had been his shield even when he had ignored its power. "Mama," he called, taking a seat beside her. "Tell me more about prayer." A smile spread across her face, the kind only a mother gives when she sees her child finally understand. "Prayer is not just words, my son. It is the key that unlocks protection, the bridge between us and the battles we cannot see." Obinna nodded. He had learned this truth the hard way, but it was a lesson he would never forget. Later that day, he walked through the village, greeting familiar faces. The news of the bus incident had spread, and elders approached him with knowing looks. "You are lucky," one said. "No, you are blessed," another corrected. Obinna smiled, but inside, he knew it wasn't just luck or mere blessing, it was faith. A faith he had ignored but had still saved him. That evening, as his mother gathered the family for their usual prayers, Obinna did something he had never done before. He led the prayer, for the dangers we see and those we don't, for the battles fought on our behalf, and for the power of faith that shields us, we give thanks. His mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, pride filling her heart. For the first time, Obinna truly understood. Faith wasn't just something people talked about, it was real, powerful, and life-saving. And from that day forward, he vowed never to travel, or live, without it. Days passed, but the memories of Obinna's journey never faded. Everywhere he went, he carried the weight of the lesson he had learned, the reality of unseen battles and the power of prayer. One afternoon, as he sat with his childhood friends under the old mango tree, laughter and stories filled the air. But when the conversation turned to an upcoming trip some of them were planning, Obinna's expression grew serious. "Have you prayed about your journey?" he asked. His friend Emeka scoffed. "Ah, Obinna, you've started sounding like your mother. Prayer is good, but it's just tradition." Obinna shook his head. "No, Emeka, I used to think the same thing. But let me tell you what happened to me on my way home." As he narrated the story, the ignored warnings, the terrifying storm, the supernatural wind that saved them, his friends listened in stunned silence. "You mean you actually felt something intervene?" Chidi asked, his usual playful tone replaced with curiosity. Obinna nodded. "I can't explain it, but I know this. If my mother hadn't prayed for me, I might not be sitting here today." The weight of his words settled over the group. Even Emeka, who had mocked him at first, looked thoughtful. That evening, as his friends prepared for their own journey, something remarkable happened. Each one took a moment to pray before leaving. Some did it quietly, others asked their parents to pray for them, but they all remembered Obinna's story. In the days that followed, the tale of Obinna's journey spread beyond the village. Travelers began to take prayer more seriously, elders reminded the young ones of its power, and even the most skeptical minds started to reconsider. For Obinna, sharing his story wasn't just about warning others, it was about making sure no one else ignored the unseen battles around them. And as he watched his friends bow their heads in prayer before their journey, he knew he had fulfilled a purpose greater than himself. Obinna's story did not end with him. As the weeks passed, his warning became a lesson shared across villages, towns, and distant lands. People spoke of the young man who had almost lost his life on a journey but was saved by the unseen power of prayer. Elders in different communities began using his experience as a teaching tool, reminding travelers never to embark on a journey without seeking divine protection. Parents told their children, merchants whispered it to their customers, and even bus drivers started offering a moment of prayer before setting out on long trips. One day, as Obinna walked through the marketplace, he overheard an elderly woman cautioning a young trader who was preparing to travel. "My son," she said, "have you prayed before starting this journey? Do not be like Obinna before he learned his lesson. The young man chuckled. Mama, I have heard his story many times. I always pray before traveling now. Obinna smiled to himself, humbled by how far his experience had spread. It was no longer just his lesson, it was now a shared wisdom, a truth passed down like the folk tales of old. Sitting under the same mango tree where he had once warned his friends, he realized something important. His near-death experience had not been for nothing. It had become a voice of caution for those who would have ignored the unseen battles of life. And so, long after the storm had passed, long after his own journey home had ended, Obinna's warning lived on, forever etched in the hearts of travelers who now understood the power of prayer. Because in the end, it was not just about reaching a destination. It was about knowing that in every step, sin or unseen, faith was the greatest protection of all.